Hi, this is Jay with Pathfinder, where we help leaders thrive in their performance. And as you guys know, I'm very passionate about building high performance teams, and that takes a very dynamic leader. And trust is one of the most important things when it comes to building those teams. And I'm here with my great longtime friend, Jamie, we've known each other since college. So what, 10 years, 10, 15 years
Oh,
maybe?
come on now. No. Like eight. And
Eight. That's right. Yeah, time flies. Time flies. That's exactly right. Um, but I wanted to interview Jamie. We've been talking about leadership for so many years that I wanted to interview you because you have this philosophy of psychological safety, and that really goes to that trust factor, as well as just all your experiences. So I thought it'd be really cool to just have a few minutes to wrap here and get your viewpoint. So, Jamie, why don't you share your background, a little bit about you, and tell us about psychological safety?
all right. Crazy times. I just changed jobs and industries. So currently working with L3 Harrison in the aerospace and defense industry, and recently left automotive. Spent 22 years in automotive, um, largely manufacturing, but did engineering and quality. Spent a lot of time in the quality space right during the famous ignition switch recall. If you've ever watched the news and ever heard of General Motors, you probably know about that.
Yep.
And I'll be honest that was really where I started to learn about psychological safety and what it means to a company and to a brand and to individuals. I didn't know it by that name at the time, but just watching what happened to some of my peer group who no longer work in the company and learning as we really unpacked the culture of the company and people being afraid to speak up, knowing something, understanding a risk, and not bringing it to bear and getting it resolved, and why that happens
Hmm.
and what it can cost a company, you could clearly see.
Mm-hmm.
Later, the term psychological safety I came across, but I really think that is the underlying challenge that a lot of companies face. And I think it starts with culture. And yeah, you're probably laughing at my Mickey Mouse, but I'm a big believer in culture and being very deliberate about it. And until you understand what psychological safety is, I don't know that it's possible to be deliberate about it. And it takes a level of humility and leadership at all levels, and it takes the willingness to spend time to listen. And what I've really learned kind of unpacking myself and getting more comfortable with trying to be a leader that instills psychological safety is the first breakthrough is really when you disagree with someone's opinion or their position and you don't assert authority. You really just talk it through, and I don't want to say the world has to be about collaboration 100%, but people need to know that their voice matters and that disagreeing is not forbidden. And once that climate takes hold, you almost can't control it anymore. It becomes innovative, it becomes open, information flows very, very freely. It requires a deep trust from a leader that bad information won't flow and that negative and incorrect information won't flow. So there's a balance in accuracy and psychological safety and instilling it.
Mm-hmm.
But once you really unlock it, I think it even research shows that it is the key to success from a long-term revenue and team and retention perspective. I haven't necessarily come across a recipe of how to create it other than just observing it and trying to embody not demonizing others for what they believe or think and trying to run to ground any dissenting opinion that comes to bear. And as people see that happen, they become more willing to voice their dissenting opinion. Does that make sense?
It does. So for people that may have not heard the term before, I mean, when you and I have talked in the past, it really is, I guess kind of creating that open and trusting environment that you can share your opinion and you can share your thoughts, and you're not going to have repercussion, to you, your role, or whatever. You're heard.
Yeah,
There's active listening going on, and you don't have to worry about the retaliation that I think so many people fear when they want to speak
absolutely.
up.
Yeah, and I think it goes deeper than that too. I think it starts at the surface and conversations and dialogue. But it really, at the end of the day, experimenting, being willing to innovate something and have it fail. Maybe it cost a little bit of money, but fail fast. And to get to that fail fast, you have to be willing to actually fail. And so that safety and understanding that your job is not at risk, your position is not at risk, your reputation is not at risk necessarily because something didn't go well, but you were willing to try it, and that willingness is celebrated. To me, that's what psychological safety means when you find the big version of psychological safety. But I do think it starts with just the conversational side of teaming and understanding direction.
So yeah, that's perfect. So you have not only just the communication side of things, but then also the actual act of being able to try something and fail. You know, I'm a big proponent of, like I know you are, of being able to allow people to make mistakes. And you know, something that we did at one point was if you tried something and you failed at it, then you would actually celebrate that at the end of the quarter. Like we would actually have a what are the things that we failed at
Fabulous
meeting,
failures.
right? Yeah, and I mean, you know, you can have champagne and cupcakes and you know basically say, okay, you know, we tried this, it didn't work, and what was the outcome? What did we learn? What did we adjust? You know, and so it was a way for people to feel like, okay, it truly is okay. They're not just saying that. I think some people might have a fear because it becomes, well, let's face it, people, you know, a lot of, not a lot, some leaders that we talk to, they'll read books, they'll hear the latest and greatest, and they'll come in and they'll say, I think people can be able to make mistakes, but you're sitting there going, really? Are you sure about that? Because I'm not so sure based on history or whatever. Um, so kind of operationalizing it, for lack of a better term, is you know I found a great way to embrace the fact, but also the fact that you have learnings. You went to innovation, right? So the learnings that you get from those situations.
Yeah, I think it really unlocks the ideas on the mind of people. If there's, I find it interesting, in 2 weeks before COVID-19 became the thing that locked down the world, I changed jobs and industries. And I'm finding that I have to really think about what does psychological safety mean in this moment? And how do I embody it, even if I don't feel it, because to make a difference in how I come across, how I'm perceived by the new team that I'm trying to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it is just it's humility, it's willingness to be vulnerable as a leader, but as an employee, I think it's a whole different experience. It's how do you convince people to speak up in a crowd? We have a lot of group meetings and we have a lot of settings where silence doesn't necessarily mean agreement. And
Mm-hmm.
how do you pick out that dissenting authority? I once had a plant manager who insisted there was a devil's advocate in every meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd assign it if there wasn't someone that was being that voice, because that's how you really bring out the best answer is to talk through all sides and play devil's advocate. And I think really leaning into it and starting sometimes with having to assign it or peel it out, it's important because people have to see it happen.
Mm-hmm.
They're not There's a lot of safety in silence and there's safety in numbers. And so if the numbers are silent, the ideas are too.
Yeah.
And I think that's been my biggest learning as I've discovered psychological safety kind of almost in that most accidental way, working with continuous improvement and understanding the power of organizations and what makes an organization really be able to drive large improvement. And the research says it's psychological safety. And that was so shocking to me until I really thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
But you really do have to be pretty introspective thinking about what does that really mean and how do I drive that as a leader and to really understand it. I think, it makes sense on the surface, but then you question it for a moment and then you have to really step back. Well, do I even have that myself? And if I don't, how can I create it for those beneath me and drive so that success helps power through others thinking that it's worthy of tackling? It's not easy and it is
Yeah.
scary.
That's so you bring up something that's kind of interesting. You know, you can do it from where you're leading from, but have you been in a situation where you've had to manage that up so that, maybe your environment isn't necessarily the environment that is conducive to that, but you've been able to influence that kind of through your actions?
I would say I did it. And one-on-one conversations with leaders that have varying levels of psychological safety, I think starts to get people thinking. It's not a topic I think you broach in a larger group,
Mm-hmm.
but I have had an environment where I would say 50% of the people felt safe or acted safe, whether they felt it or not, and 50% were typically very quiet and didn't share their opinions in the group, but would later kind of circle back on the back end. Um, and talking one-on-one with that leader and, hey, there's opinions that aren't being heard in the group. Somehow you need to build that trust to get that voice to come out and get it to start, and just having some candid dialogue not about who was feeling unsafe and not sharing opinions in public, but coming back with them, but just sharing that it existed.
Yeah.
I would say an introspective leader would hear that. The introspective leader that I had that experience with did hear that and took a step back and rethought how to manage through it, and with some success. I think some are just very jaded, and a larger piece of the situation changes. They just aren't willing to take that risk. And I think it depends a little bit on what they've been through and how larger situations have impacted them personally, whether they've actually been a part of something or just witnessed it.
Yeah.
Not everybody opens up with the same speed. Does that make sense? I think
It does.
it's being cognizant of it, and in trying to open up psychological safety, not causing a lack of it by how you try and open it up. You have to be very mindful of the idea versus the people and the who and the what.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we're all shaped by our past experiences, right? So if you've had a leader that maybe has been burned the times that they've tried to speak up or step in, and create that kind of safety themselves, then maybe they're going to be more hesitant as they move through the ranks, or they're put in different situations. And so, it really sounds like, kind of your approach is, just having that one-off conversation, not actually saying, hey, Sally and Bob, they're totally against this, but they're not going to speak up because, they're worried about what you're going to do, but more so saying, hey, I do know I am close to my people. I know there's opinions out there that differ. How can we create an environment that makes that okay? It's going to help us out as an organization, and then letting them know that that's actually what their people are asking for, and that you as a leader, you have the courage to be able to say that, to them. And then hopefully at that point, like you said, they're introspective, they're open-minded, and then they understand that, okay, well, while this may have happened in my past,
Yeah.
my people are asking for this, and I know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And I think talking through it with people, giving them time to adjust to the idea, to understand that it's not necessarily them that's preventing people from voicing their ideas. It might be the individual's experience, not the leader.
Mm-hmm.
But just brainstorming ways to get people to speak up, and brainstorming ways to get the opinion that isn't the majority in the room, and then appreciating it when it happens. Coaching, I think, is multi-directional.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter where you are in an organization, you have to lead up, down, and across. And a very brilliant leader described that to me one time in terms of, how your ability to do at least two of the three is really, really critical in order to be successful and at a higher level of leadership. And that managing up diminishes in return value the higher you go. You really have to do across and down very, very well.
Yeah.
And when you stitch all of that together, to me, it's still about how do you develop psychological safety at those levels is very different. How you don't represent a threat to your peer is very different from how you are open to a completely contrary opinion from inside your organization. It's also very different than being, having willingness to voice something but not being insubordinate to your leader. And they're different skills. So if someone's mastered one well, I think it's very easy to help them see the effect of needing the others.
Mm-hmm.
If someone has none of them, and I've been very lucky, I've never really run across a leader or been a part of an organization that hasn't had a strength in one. And since I've been able to articulate the concept as psychological safety, specifically in an operations world, safety is so paramount. It's talked about all the time. We're constantly doing things to make sure people are physically safe. The concept then of psychological safety just attaches to that priority, and it gives it voice.
Yeah.
It may not be true in non-operational situations, so that's something I get to capitalize on, but it really does connect the two ideas really, really well in an operational situation.
No, that makes sense. You know, I think that is interesting coming from an industry view and articulating it, you know, and I guess kind of likening it to operation and physical safety. And I think coming from healthcare, you know, one of the things we always talked about was patient safety, you know, and you know, so maybe that's kind of an avenue that people could take is just look for some type of correlation to help people understand. You know, we're day in and day out, we're spending so much time focused on our patients and their safety, and you know what we're doing with them. We need to do the same for us, you know, in here, and we need to do that because we're in a cerebral situation. We need that for our brains, for lack of a better term,
Right.
and our physical, you know, our psychological situation, and make sure that it's safe and conducive to innovation and speaking up. And that's an interesting way to make that correlation, because I think, you know, some people maybe don't know what they don't know, and they need to have an example or some way of kind of pulling it out. So that's an interesting one. That's pretty cool. So where, you know, we're interesting right now because we're in COVID, and I'm calling these like the COVID Chronicles. You know, because we have as you know, we've had audio issues, video issues. We all have, like, you know, kids are, you know, on like sucking up the bandwidth and everything else. But you know, one of the things I was thinking about the other day is now we're kind of all leaders. As a parent, you know, as somebody who's having to you know, just even maybe thinking logistically different in your life on how you're going to go get your groceries and what you're going to go do, these simple tasks that we normally would have done. So, you know, do you think that this is something that translates even outside of the workplace and into homes
Can
in the
we start
community?
with marriage for a moment? I mean, honestly, I mean,
poor,
you know
poor,
my better
poor
half, so we
John,
don't have
poor
to.
John.
But I think it does. I mean, I think this is hard. This is really hard for everybody, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. This is just a whole different situation than any of us have ever been in. We're isolated from people, but we're stuck with our family. But we can't go anywhere, but we need to get out.
Yeah,
And, you know, being able to get our children to express how they feel
yeah,
is really important to not having long-term impact. So I think it absolutely does translate to home. And I think it also translates to how do we get back to whatever a new normal looks like, or I heard somebody call it a new abnormal. But just understanding that we have to talk it through, and whatever makes you feel safe, do that.
hmm,
And if somebody has a different opinion, then they're on a different mindset of what the balance of safety is for them. I mean, whether you're oh,
I'll be able to edit this.
oh, if you can't laugh at yourself, if you
I know.
can't laugh at yourself, why should you laugh at me?
Exactly.
Um, you know, I think it's such a foreign concept to many, psychological safety, but it really isn't. It's just a different way of describing kindness and, like you said, active listening, and really talking about both sides of a decision before you make a final direction.
Yeah,
It's really just making sure those things happen, and getting everybody's participation, and making sure people feel like they're valued and what they bring to the table.
yeah,
Um,
that's great.
but it's packaged, I think, in a concept that once you piece, and I'll use my sweatshirt as inspiration to make sure I talk about this. I think it's important to talk about how deliberate you have to be to keep psychological safety real and how hard it is on both sides, especially when you're very convinced of something and someone has a very divergent opinion, or a method is going a certain way and someone has a very new innovation that completely challenges the way you do business. It can be really hard. So you have to keep it forefront and you have to be intentional about it. Disney says culture by design, not by default. That culture to me has to be one of psychological safety if you want to move forward fast.
That's great. Well, I know that you have to run, but I really appreciate your time, Jamie. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, certainly around leadership um, and also just catching up. I hope that.
I'm glad we got to chat. I'm having a lot of fun in Michigan, hoping eventually to make my relocation to Florida, but I'd love to chat again, and I look forward to joining your next webinar.
Definitely, absolutely. I look forward to it. We're on Thursday, so I'll make sure we get the information to you. All right.
Perfect.
Take care.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.